Thank you.
For the recording. So my name is Marc De Vleeschauwer, and let's proceed with what can we evaluate. So on the verbal, so I've divided my elements on which it can be commented, and then it's positive or negative on, I have two groups of delivery, like verbal, non-verbal. My third group is structure and content, and the fourth one is like purpose, the purpose of doing the speech. So we'll do it a bit interactive. So on the verbal, so this is where I would like to start a whiteboard. Can I see? No, so I probably have to share it. So can someone slide the whiteboard for me? I think that everyone can be on the whiteboard. So if I put the category, oh yes, I see names. So top left, whoops. I cannot type. Okay, I won't use the whiteboard because I'm not able to do it. So let's use the chat. So in the chat, type if you evaluate verbal delivery. So what could you focus on? What could be your element? So please just type element on the chat. That would be the simplest way to do it. I'll go back to sharing my screen. Rate, pace. And last week, yeah, I mentioned that's one of my elements that I have to work on. And even if I've been Toastmaster for many, many years, I think it becomes easier to do speech, but there's things that we always have to work on. The speed, pace, rate of speech, volume, tone. So I'll go with my elements. Filler words. So most of them are kind of put into part. So filler words. So those are the words that we could add sometime, and when we look for something and we fill the void. So, but it's noise actually. So it's better to just think and go on. So that's something when you do Toastmaster, learn to be comfortable with silence. And it's better to not say anything because it gives the audience time to think. Because if we say filler words like your ear and your brain has to filter that out. So they have to remove those sounds to say, well, this is not important. So it kind of impede communication. We I've not seen a good way to do it online, but in person, we had a bell. So if someone was using it, there was the grammarian, the role was to ring it. So we kind of stopped doing it at some, you learn very fast when you're the being to do it. So pronunciation, you have to pronounce if it's pronounced well or not. Clarity of the word, the speed and pace, and often they are linked. Like if I myself talk too fast, then pronunciation gets sometimes incorrect. Volume. So there's a volume. Is it loud enough? So often beginner speaker are a bit low, but also is it varied? So does it sometimes can someone can play with the volume to be very interesting. And the breathing too. So is the this is might be more advanced, but especially when we're stressed, like the muscle get all contracted, so it's difficult to breathe. Or is the breathing done at the right time? So sometimes taking deep breath before starting to. So there's an exercise that can actually be done to get the diaphragm more relaxed, so it helps breathing. So those are some elements that can be done. Like yeah, and sentence structure from Fred is there, and there could also be correct language. Could also put, and this is why we have a grammarian, especially in the bilingual club, because there's a lot of people that practice their let's say second official language for the government way of saying it. So there's the faux amis, so like false friends, like the words that seems to be the same one in French and English but are not the same. Well, if you were the chair, for example, well, on n'est pas la chaise en français because it doesn't have the same meaning there. So those are some of the verbal elements that can be added on. So Helen had body language, but I'll put that in the Maybe next one, nonverbal. So let's do the same exercise. So what would you suggest or think it could be added on or commented on for nonverbal? So let's use the chat. I see eye contact, smiling, body gesture, posture, looking directly at the audience. Emotion. So some of the elements that I added, like eye contact. So online, it's a bit more, I would say easy to do. You just have to look at your camera. But if you're in a room, it's a bit more challenging. So when I say to people, there's different elements, like the basic ways, like at least to look ahead, not your notes, but you could even look at the end of the room. And then next level is you look at individuals. The third level is you look at someone, you finish your ideas, and then you move to the next person. So you talk to everyone one after the other. And even sometimes some comments someone made during a speech, and going to Toastmasters, sometimes it's hearing other evaluators are is very interesting. There was a speaker that was speaking always to the same side of the room. So the speaker was going mostly left rather than right. So people on the other side were like never having eye contact. So those are small things that can be done. Gestures. And someone mentioned on camera, if you're in person, you could have the ends around your, let's say, middle body. If I do it online, you just see that I seems to be moving, but you don't see them. So it seems weird at the beginning, but if you look at YouTubers, they have always their ends there because this is where camera is. So if you're in person and online, it's not the same way to use your ends. Stance. And this is how you are standing up. A lot of people, when they're nervous, they cross their legs. So if you're standing up with legs crossed, your posture changes a bit, and then your volume, because of your body is not fully standing, you might have more difficulties pronouncing well. The volume is lower, and the way you look. So sometimes we took picture of the club, and then I noticed I seem to always been slanting on the same side. And then I noticed because often when I stand with the lectern in the person to deliver a speech, I put all my weight on one leg, and then it shifts me. So I have to think about that. So those are elements that can be done. And then when you do it online, so today actually I'm sitting, and this has been when the beginning of the pandemic when we had more online meeting. It's better if you speak standing up, and it shows it ears because there's more energy when we're sitting. Sometimes we start to shivel, like to get around the stairs, so on the chair. So that's something that to be aware of. So even when you deliver online, it might be good to try to stand up if you could have your camera at the right height. Position and movement, so it's where you are. So stage use, someone mentioned that, like, yeah, Terry, and I think maybe Andrew, is when you're on a stage, you don't want to stay at the back. So there's some technique that can be done. So it's good to try to use it. And if you move around, it really brings energy to the room. And especially if your audience is sitting at a big table, sometimes you can go closer to them and then can go back and then go back. So you could use that as a strategy to do some movement. Sometimes we have, well, even in Toastmasters, sometimes we have projects when there's like more than one person interacting. So how you work with them, that's a challenge too. Like, do you look at your other partner? How you pass the speaking baton from one to the other? Those type of elements can be commented on. And then interaction with the audience. So that's a good way to bring the audience in your speech. So in Toastmaster, when you start the program, at the beginning is really just to be able to get up there and deliver the speech. But then the more you progress, you want to get the audience in your speech. So this is you could go with rhetorical question or even interaction, like end raise survey. So you can start a speech like, oh, who in the audience has ever never delivered a speech? So you could use the online when in a room it could be done. Uh, and then the chat survey, getting people involved. Those are all elements that could make the speech more effective. So that could be commented on. And even in a big room. So uh, when I was in charge of training pattern branch. So sometime we had a room like 24D, so there was about 100 persons sitting there. I bought some colored plate, like dessert plate, small ones. So everyone had like three of them, so they could vote by color. So there was a way, or even like a sheet of paper with letters. So there's a way to get like interactive quiz, even if in person in a big room. So one can be creative. So let's move to structure and content. So let's use the chat again. What could be some elements that could be commented on for evaluation? Oops. Yeah, so there we mentioned wrote the classic intro, body, conclusion, and then Natasha kind of followed like the flow between those different parts. Yeah, integrated with supporting slides, examples, contenu adapté à l'auditoire. Yeah, just logical, different sources, starting your experience, anecdotes like, oh yeah, I think there's a few that I didn't include there, so I'll keep it there. So yeah, so at first I had the intro, body, conclusion, so it could be commented on. So the intro was the start, so effective. So did the person start in a slow note? So usually when you start, it has to be somewhat of a sponge. So like, okay, to be people that are attracted. And it has to be clear, like what's the rest, so the flow of your different elements from the intro to the conclusion and afterwards. So I have the flow between parts. Someone mentioned image storytelling, so that when it's well done, it's really good to comment on that. Like if humor anecdotes are used, so how this kind of story made the concept more clear. So especially if it's, for example, a very kind of technical type of speech, if the someone has the kind of a storytelling or anecdotes to explain it, that could be an example of very what is efficient. Because an evaluator is not only constructive, so they really also have to provide like to show what was great in the speech. So if it was effective, especially, it's like why were we like captivated by the speaker? This is where it needs to be done. So the evaluator has a role to underline those elements. Conclusion to how does it finish? So often the conclusion should relate to the introduction. Um, Sometimes the speaker they prepare a lot of time on the body but not much on the conclusion, so the body is very strong and then it just seems to be kind of fizzle out, and then people are kind of not sure, it's like, oh, do we clap, is it finished or not? So it has to be well done. So a suggestion we often make to a beginner speaker is like learn your first lines by art and learn your conclusion. You could improvise. I was like, improvise? Improvise the middle part easier because you know the topic, you could talk about it for many minutes. But the intro and conclusion need to be very strong. So those one you could like write them out and load them. And also, is there call to actions? Like you deliver your speech, do you want the audience to do something? So that could be a part of it. Or a take-home message. Like is if there's only one thing they should remember about your speech, you could mention it in the conclusion. So those are elements that could be added on. And there was, yeah, someone mentioned the slide. That could be interesting too. That's something that can be, if there's too much text, not enough text, if there's just image, some elements, the way they were done, it were too complex, that could be there. Example source, that's also especially, and kind of bit with my next point about purpose. If it's a technical, if you want to convince people, do you have facts, or is it facts that seem just made up, or do you cite the relevant reference, or do you mention facts or data without mentioning where they come from, which could be a challenge. So there's a ton of things that can be commented on, and those are some of the elements. So I'll move to my fourth part, purpose. So more, what's the purpose of the speech? And that could link to BBN comment, like un contenu adapté à l'auditoire. So there's also not just l'auditoire, but it's like, what do you want to deliver? And what could the tools you were using in your speech, were they relevant to what you were trying to achieve? So we could put some notes in the chats, sorry. So do the main points of the speech support the speech purpose? How to teach. Reinforce the subject. A call to action, captivate the audience. So if I often I mentioned there's like four purpose or categories of purpose for a speech, like either want to inform, entertain, convince, or inspire. So I would say it goes from the easiest to the most challenging ones. Inform is information. Entertain, there need to be some humor, some variation, tone. So convince, you need to have facts, but also you need to call to a bit more the emotion of the audience. And inspire, it needs to call a lot to the emotion of the audience. So you have to establish a link. So depending on where it is, the tools we could say, or the way you use speech are different. So already I mentioned like one is more fact, one is more anecdotes, one is more emotion. So it needs to be relevant. So sometimes, most often comment I made, sometimes it's not clear if it's only info or is to convince people to use something. So this is where other elements like call to action go on together. Like there's the audience. So the this is an expression I had in the training world, the with him. So what's in it for me? So why should the audience listen to it? So they decided to go to a Toastmaster meeting. They're willing to give you 7 minutes of their time or 10 minutes or half an hour. Well, why should they care about it? So it's important at some point in your speech, better in the beginning, that they know why they should listen to you. And this reminds me, even the intro, which we didn't have today because maybe there was a bigger one last week. Usually there's an intro of the speaker, which is part of the speech. So the speaker should make sure that in the intro, you define what's the credibility of the speaker, and then why is it important to listen to that subject. So it's like, why should they listen and why are you as a speaker relevant? And it kind of links to that. So it is important sometimes for the speaker if they talk, let's say if I want to inform because I love I don't know, animal welfare. And for me, it's very important. Well, maybe I should still highlight it. Why is should everyone care about that at the beginning of my speech to be sure that they are listening, that they are captivated by it, and is the objective achieved? So if it's the goal is to convince, but it's more informative, maybe there's something that's missing that you could comment on those type of elements. So it was the appropriate tone or content. So those type of elements that could be what is the purpose. So the reinforcement, so the support, so and they all go together. Because here I mentioned like what's the purpose and or was the audience like kind of into the speech or did they find what they needed? But this comes back to oh, maybe the speaker used like a rhetorical question. So when you do your speech evaluation, you could actually link your parts, link saying that the purpose was X, and then using the tool, let's say there was a discussion to engage the audience, it was very effective. So all those elements can go together. So those are all elements that you can comment on. But if you remember it's in my sheet. So when you deliver one, you have maximum 3 minutes to do it. So you cannot talk about everything. Even you won't evaluate all of those at all speech. You just if you remember last week, I mentioned you first talk to the speaker before they start. So you ask them if they have specific elements that they want the evaluation to focus on. So those could be top of your mind. And then afterwards, you could evaluate whatever you want. So what's more obvious for you? And if you're a beginner evaluator, you might either think about those four categories, trying, okay, I'll try to find a comment for each of them, or even within categories, focus on some that are more relevant for you. Further in a club, after a while, you know your colleague Toastmasters. So you know a bit more what their strengths are and what their challenges are. So you might want to focus more on the challenge and like on those type of elements. But you just have a few numbers. So when you fill your evaluation sheet, you note a number of them. And when you deliver it, you have maximum 5 elements to comment on. So I try to have like 3 positive and 2 constructive. But you have to decide, you have to make choice which ones are the most relevant for the speaker, but also since you're doing a verbal evaluation for the rest of the club. So if there's some elements that are only for the speaker, I sometimes keep them in writing. So I try to select the element that are key, but it'll be learning points for the speaker and the audience. And it might seem a lot. Well, this is why we also deliver this evaluation as a personal opinion. So I found these elements to be good. I think this could have been done different. Not that it was like this was wrong. This is the way everyone should do it. We provide it as a personal opinion. And again, for maybe new people to Toastmaster, there's one evaluator that is assigned to do the verbal, but other members also provide comments. So they write comments, and this is very useful to balance opinions. I did some speech sometimes where the opinion I received were contradicting each other. So one was saying like there's too much detail, the other one is not enough detail. So you say, well, that's probably in between. So if everyone is on the same side, you might say, okay, that's really something I have to change. But sometimes it's more balanced. So even if the evaluator was very strong on something, maybe other people might have different view. Or another example might be if the evaluator is more as less experience. So they might not see all the potential for improvement in the speech, while a more experienced member sitting in the audience might provide those feedbacks in writing afterwards. So I think this is important that in a club, not only just the evaluator provide the evaluation, but all members provide some comments too. So now I see the green lights. So I suggest that we move to your part. So some of the participants to try it. So if you want to do a mini speech, like a short evaluation, so you could do an evaluation that's less than 2 minutes, try to aim for one. So maybe it could be simply you open your evaluation, you do maybe one positive, one constructive, and then you can conclude it. So if there's some volunteers for that. Maybe if we could have others, those that didn't participate last week, but still, if we don't have any volunteers from new to this week, we could go with other, than the one from last week if they wanted. So, any volunteers to try an evaluation? So maybe Terry, we could stop the recording there too.